It's night, and the gate on the northern road stands open. Outside it waits an army that has camped beneath these walls 3 times in 3 years. Inside lies a city that has already been starved twice in 3 years. The walls themselves are unbreached, no ram, no siege tower, and no assault. How the gate came to be open, the surviving accounts cannot agree, and each of them blames someone different. Welcome to Same Day, Different Century. I'm Zach. Today is August 24th. The city behind that gate was not, by 410, the capital of anything. 8 years earlier, the Western Emperor Honorius had moved his court to Ravenna, a port town ringed by marshes. Rome kept the Senate, the great landholding families, and several 100,000 residents who ate bread baked from grain shipped in from North Africa. No foreign army had forced the city in roughly 8 centuries. The man outside the walls had spent most of his career trying to get inside the Roman system rather than tear it down. Alaric led a Gothic army that had formed inside the empire's own borders, out of the peoples admitted across the Danube a generation earlier, and the soldiers Rome had recruited from them since. He had fought for the Emperor Theodosius in the Civil War of 394. He had held a Roman generalship in the Balkans. What he wanted, consistently, across a decade of negotiation, came down to 3 things: land his people could farm, a guaranteed annual issue of grain, and a senior Roman command for himself. For years the man who negotiated with him was Stilicho, the half-Vandal general who ran the Western government in Honorius's name. In 408, Stilicho pushed the Senate to buy Alaric off with 4,000 pounds of gold. One senator objected that what they were purchasing was not peace, but a contract of servitude, a line that captured how the settlement looked to Rome's political class, and how dangerous it made Stilicho. That August, on the 22nd, Honorius had him executed at Ravenna on the accusation that he was conspiring to put his own son on the throne. Roman troops turned on the families of the Federate soldiers garrisoned in Italian cities and killed them. The surviving soldiers, 30,000 of them, walked out of Roman service and joined Alaric. The regime had eliminated its negotiator and manufactured its enemy's army. Alaric came into Italy that autumn and blockaded Rome. He did not assault the walls. He took the Tiber and the port and waited. Famine and disease did most of the work. The city bought him off again: 5,000 pounds of gold, 30,000 of silver, thousands of silk tunics and dyed hides, and 3,000 pounds of pepper. Some of the metal came from stripping and melting statues of the old gods. 2 more years went by in this pattern. Alaric besieged the city again in 409 and forced the Senate to proclaim a rival emperor, a senator named Priscus Attalus, then removed him the following summer when the arrangement failed to deliver Africa's grain. What the first blockade did to the city is recorded mainly by a later Greek historian, who describes rationing cut to a third, disease spreading in the crowded districts, and bodies left unburied inside the walls. Alaric reopened talks with Honorius. Near Ravenna, a Gothic officer in Roman service attacked his camp in the middle of the truce. Alaric survived and stopped negotiating. His target was then decided for him. Ravenna sat behind marshland and could be supplied by sea, which made it nearly unassailable and also nearly irrelevant. Rome was neither. It was the one place he could take that the government could not afford to have taken. What happened over the next 3 days is the episode the ancient world argued about for the next century, and it started with a gate no one can reliably say who opened. One 6th century historian offers 2 incompatible stories in the same passage: that a Roman noblewoman opened the Salarian Gate out of pity for the starving, and that Alaric had earlier presented young Gothic slaves as gifts to aristocratic households, who overpowered the guards on a signal. Both have the shape of legend rather than report. The likeliest account is that a population that had been starving for weeks could not reliably hold 18 gates and 12 miles of wall. What is certain is what the masonry shows. The Aurelian walls were not broken. Rome was entered, not stormed. The plundering lasted 3 days. In practice, that meant a systematic search for portable wealth, gold and silver plate, coin, church vessels, and the fittings of rich houses. From the Lateran, the Goths took a silver canopy given by Constantine that weighed over 2,000 pounds. The closest thing to a personal account comes from Jerome, writing in Bethlehem to a woman named Principia a couple of years afterward. Soldiers entered the house of Marcella, an elderly Roman aristocrat who had given her fortune away years earlier. They refused to believe in her poverty and beat her with cudgels for treasure she no longer had. They then let the two women go to the Basilica of St. Paul, Jerome writes, so that they might find there safety or at least a grave. Marcella died within days. Jerome's summary of the news was blunt. The city that had taken the whole world was itself taken. Fires burned near the gate, where the gardens of Sallust were destroyed and never rebuilt, and on the Aventine, and in the Forum. But the physical record of the sack is thinner than its reputation. For generations, visitors to the Roman Forum were shown coins fused into the marble pavement of the Basilica Aemilia, sold as the melted till of a shop abandoned as the Goths came through. The fire is real, and it belongs to the early 5th century. Nothing ties it to the Goths rather than to any of the accidents that burned Rome in ordinary years. Across the city, archaeologists have struggled to isolate a destruction layer for 410 at all. That supports either of two readings: that the damage was overwhelmingly theft of valuables rather than demolition, or that repair was fast enough to erase it. Alaric and most of his army were Christians of the Arian persuasion, and Orosius, writing a few years later, says Alaric ordered anyone sheltering in the basilicas of Peter and Paul to be spared, and had the sacred vessels of St. Peter carried back to the church under escort. Orosius was writing to rebut pagan critics, so his account argues a case. Alaric had spent 10 years trying to convert his army into a salaried Roman command. Rome's buildings were worth nothing to him. Rome's silver was payroll. And no Roman field army came to interfere, because Honorius was behind the marches at Ravenna, and his court prioritized the survival of the regime, not the city. People were killed in their houses and in the streets, and women were raped, including Christian women who had taken vows. A fact we know because Augustine devoted the opening pages of a long book to arguing that they had not been dishonored by what was done to them, and should not take their own lives for it. Residents were carried off to be ransomed or sold, and imperial legislation in the following years still had to work out the legal status of freeborn Romans who came back from captivity. The grain dole rolls, a welfare program that provided subsidized or free wheat to eligible male citizens living in Rome, shrank sharply over the next decade, proof of a diminishing population. On the 3rd day the Goths left, taking captives for ransom or sale, and taking the emperor's half-sister, Galla Placidia, with them. Alaric marched south with more wealth than he had ever been offered. He was heading for Africa, because the grain fleet was the lever that actually moved Ravenna. His men sacked Nola on the way. The ships he gathered to cross the strait to Sicily were wrecked in a storm, and before the year was out, Alaric was dead at Cassentia in the far south, apparently of illness, within months of entering Rome. In Constantinople, the Eastern Emperor ordered public mourning. Refugees moved to Sicily, Africa, and the eastern provinces, and Jerome complained that there was not an hour in which his monastery was not receiving crowds of them. He also reported that the Roman commander in Africa was tearing girls out of their mothers' arms and selling them to Syrian traders, which suggests how much protection displaced Romans could actually expect from Roman officials. Within 3 years, the government was writing off most of the tax owed by the provinces the Goths had crossed. The empire in the west lasted another 66 years after the gate opened. Rome was sacked again in 455, more thoroughly. Alaric's successors married into the imperial family, and by 418 were settled in southwestern Gaul as a kingdom that outlasted the empire that had hired them. We still date the fall of Rome from moments like this one. which tells us less about the year 410 than about our preference for a single day over a long and complicated process. That's Same Day, Different Century. I'm Zach. We'll be back tomorrow with another date, another story. Thanks for listening.